Have you ever prayed and felt like the heavens were silent? You spoke to God with tears in your eyes. You asked for guidance. You begged for direction, but all you felt was silence. And slowly, a question began forming in your heart. God, are you even listening? But what if the real question is not whether God is listening to you? What if the real question is whether you are able to hear Him? Because the truth is this: God has never stopped speaking. The issue is not God's silence. The issue is the noise within us. One of the biggest reasons many people struggle to hear God's voice is not because God has stopped speaking. It's because the world around us has become overwhelmingly loud. Not just loud with sound, but loud with demands, distractions, opinions, worries, and endless information. Our minds wake up already full. Before we even take a moment to breathe, we're already thinking about responsibilities, problems, messages, news, social media, and everything that requires our attention. Our focus is pulled in 100 different directions. And in the middle of that constant noise, we expect to hear the quiet voice of God. But God's voice is rarely forced or overwhelming. It is often gentle, subtle, patient, and if our hearts are constantly crowded with other things, it becomes very difficult to recognize that voice. Distraction is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like productivity. Sometimes it looks like entertainment. Sometimes it looks like just checking something quickly. But slowly, these small distractions begin to shape the condition of our minds. Our attention becomes scattered. Our thoughts become restless. Our patience becomes shorter. Our ability to sit quietly with our own thoughts becomes uncomfortable. We begin to live in a state where silence feels strange. Yet silence is often the environment where spiritual clarity grows. When the mind is constantly stimulated, it loses the ability to slow down and perceive deeper things. And hearing God requires a heart that is able to pause, reflect, and listen. In the Bible, God does not always speak in dramatic ways. In fact, one of the most powerful examples appears in 1 Kings 19:11-12. The prophet Elijah experienced powerful natural events, a strong wind, an earthquake, and fire. But the passage explains something surprising. God was not in those dramatic displays. After all the noise and intensity passed, there came a gentle whisper. And that is where God's presence was revealed. This moment teaches something important. God's voice is not always found in what is loud. It is often found in what remains after the noise fades. But if our lives never allow the noise to fade, we may miss those quiet moments where God is speaking. This is how distraction changes the heart. When a person lives in constant distraction, it doesn't just affect their schedule. It slowly affects their inner life. The heart becomes impatient. The mind becomes scattered. Reflection becomes rare. Instead of slowing down to ask deeper questions, we react quickly to everything happening around us. Over time, this creates a spiritual distance, not because God moved away, but because our attention moved elsewhere. Spiritual awareness grows in attentiveness. It grows when we notice the small moments, when we reflect on our choices, when we sit quietly with Scripture, when we allow our minds to rest long enough to hear what God might be teaching us. Without those moments, our spiritual life can become shallow and rushed. Busyness can feel meaningful, but it can also hide emptiness. Sometimes the noise in our lives comes from busyness. Being busy can feel important. It can make us feel productive, useful, and needed. But busyness can also become a way of avoiding stillness. Stillness forces us to face things we might be avoiding: our fears, our doubts, our need for guidance, our need for God. That is why the Bible gives a powerful instruction in Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness is not laziness. Stillness is a spiritual discipline. It is the decision to step away from constant activity so that your heart can reconnect with God's presence. When the soul becomes quiet, clarity begins to return. Let's relearn how to be quiet. Many people today are not used to silence. Even when we are alone, we often fill the space with music, videos, or constant scrolling. But learning to hear God sometimes requires relearning how to sit quietly with Him. This doesn't mean waiting for an audible voice. Often, God's guidance comes through a deep sense of peace about a decision, a conviction that something in our life needs to change, insight from Scripture, wisdom that grows through prayer and reflection. These moments rarely appear when the mind is rushing. They appear when the heart slows down enough to notice them. Take a moment to reflect. If distraction is drowning out God's voice, it can be helpful to ask honest questions. How much of my day is filled with noise? When was the last time I sat quietly with God without rushing to the next task? Do I make space for reflection, or am I constantly moving from one thing to another? These questions are not meant to create guilt. They are meant to create awareness, because awareness is the first step toward change. The world will always be loud. There will always be another notification, another responsibility, another voice competing for your attention. But hearing God often begins with a simple choice. The choice to step away from the noise, the choice to slow down, the choice to create space where your heart can finally breathe. Because God's voice is not lost. It has never disappeared, but sometimes the whisper of God can only be heard after the noise of the world fades. And when you begin creating moments of stillness again, you may discover something powerful. God was closer than you realized the entire time. To everyone who has subscribed to Whispers to Heaven, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Every view, every comment, every amen reminds me that these prayers are reaching someone who needed them. You're not just subscribers. You're a part of a community that lifts hearts and sends whispers of hope to heaven. May your lives be filled with peace, strength, and quiet moments of grace.